My name is Delphine, and I want to tell you about the best wedding reception I have ever attended. It happened to be my own, and the reason it became unforgettable had nothing to do with the flowers or the cake or the first dance. It had everything to do with my cousin Renata, a white dress she had no business wearing, a photographer she had hired herself, and the moment she stood up in the middle of my reception dinner and decided that my wedding was the perfect backdrop for her engagement announcement. I want to tell you about all of it, but mostly I want to tell you about what happened when I walked to the DJ booth, took the microphone, and spoke 11 words that made the room go completely silent. Renata and I grew up 3 houses apart. As children, we were inseparable in the way that proximity sometimes forces. We shared a grandmother, a school bus, and 14 years of holidays spent around the same table. As adults, we shared considerably less. Renata had a talent I did not fully appreciate until I was older. She had a gift for being the most important person in any room she entered. Not through accomplishment or warmth, but through sheer force of redirection. Every conversation found its way back to her. Every milestone in someone else's life became a launching pad for a story about her own. I noticed this over the years and filed it away as a personality trait rather than a warning. I should have treated it as a warning. I met my husband Callum at 26. We dated for 3 years. Got engaged on a Tuesday, evening in our own kitchen with no photographer and no audience. Just the 2 of us and a ring he had been carrying in his coat pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for a moment that felt right. We were happy about it in a private, solid way that did not require documentation. We planned our wedding for 14 months. I chose every detail carefully. The venue, a converted farmhouse with long wooden tables and string lights. The flowers, white garden roses and eucalyptus, the menu, which we tasted 6 times before deciding. I sent Renata an invitation because she was family and because not inviting her would have caused a disruption. I didn't have the energy to manage. She called me 3 weeks before the wedding and asked what the dress code was. I told her garden formal, soft colors, nothing white or ivory. She said, of course, absolutely, would not dream of it. Her voice was warm and agreeable in the way that should have told me something. She arrived at the ceremony in champagne. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, because champagne in certain lights reads as gold. But when she walked into the reception venue and the string lights hit her dress from above, it was white. It was unmistakably, deliberately, architecturally white. Floor length, fitted with a small train. She had also brought a man I had never met, whom she introduced to my mother as her boyfriend Marcus, and a woman with a camera bag over her shoulder whom she introduced as a friend. I noticed all 3 of these things, and I made a decision in that moment that would carry me through the rest of the evening. I decided not to react. Not yet. I smiled at Renata and told her she looked lovely and went back to my husband and my wedding. Dinner was served at 7. We had 220 guests seated at long farmhouse tables. The string lights had been dimmed. There were candles. The food was extraordinary. Callum squeezed my hand under the table and I thought, this is the best night of my life, and I meant it completely. The speeches began after the main course. My father spoke for 7 minutes and made half the room cry. Callum's best man spoke for 9 minutes and made the entire room laugh. My maid of honor, Elena, spoke for 5 minutes and made me cry specifically. And then, in the pause between Elena sitting down and the dessert being brought out, Renata stood up. She did not ask anyone's permission. She did not look at me. She picked up her glass and tapped it with her knife and waited for the room to give her its attention. And because people at weddings are conditioned to respond to the sound of glass being tapped, the room quieted. Her photographer friend rose from her seat and positioned herself 3 tables away with the camera already raised. Renata smiled at the room and said she hoped everyone was having a wonderful evening. She said she had something she wanted to share, something that felt right to say surrounded by so much love and celebration. She said that earlier that day, before the ceremony, Marcus had asked her to marry him. She said yes. She said she hoped everyone would join her in celebrating, because there was nothing more beautiful than love, and what better place to announce love than a wedding? The room made the sound that rooms make when they do not know what else to do. A scatter of applause, some confused murmuring, a few people looking toward me to measure their response against mine. Renata's photographer was taking pictures. Marcus looked both proud and slightly uncertain. like a man who had been told this was a good idea and was now less sure. I sat at the head table and I felt Callum's hand find mine under the tablecloth. I felt Elena beside me go completely still. I felt 220 people waiting to find out what I would do. I picked up my napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. I pushed my chair back. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked to the DJ booth at the far end of the room. The DJ, a young man named Theo, who I had met 3 times during planning, and who I had always found to be extremely perceptive, took one look at my face and handed me the microphone without being asked. I walked back to the center of the room. I waited for complete silence. Then I said, clearly and warmly, so that every person in that farmhouse could hear me, "Congratulations, Renata. That is wonderful news, and your coordinator will be in touch tomorrow about the invoice." The room did not know what to do with that for exactly 2 seconds. And then my aunt, Renata's own mother, let out a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely. And then the room understood, because here is what the room did not know yet but was about to. I had, over 14 months of planning, paid for every element of that evening myself. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the string lights, the cake, the music, all of it contracted and invoiced and paid in full under my name. Renata had just announced her engagement to 220 people, with a hired photographer using my venue, my catering, my flowers, my lighting, and my guest list as her audience. She had created, without asking, the most expensive engagement announcement backdrop that money could buy. Money that was mine. My coordinator, a woman named Petra who had been standing near the kitchen entrance all evening, had heard everything. She caught my eye from across the room and gave me a single nod. We had not planned this, but Petra was the kind of professional who understood situations quickly, and I had always trusted her judgment completely. Renata's smile had not moved, but something behind it had. She said my name in a tone that was trying to be light. She said she hoped I wasn't serious. She said she had only wanted to share her happiness. I said I was genuinely happy for her. I said love was worth celebrating and Marcus seemed wonderful. I said the invoice would reflect the venue hire, catering per head for 2 unregistered guests, and the photography, coordination fee that my contract with the venue included for all commercial photography on the premises. I said Petra would have the total by morning. I said it all in the same warm voice. I had used to welcome people at the beginning of the evening. Then I handed the microphone back to Theo and walked back to my seat. Callum was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. He leaned close and said quietly that he was fairly certain he had just fallen in love with me a second time. Elena had both hands over her mouth. My father was staring at the tablecloth with the specific concentration of a man trying very hard not to laugh out loud at his own daughter's wedding. Renata left 40 minutes later. Marcus held her hand as they walked out, and he had the look of a man who was beginning to understand what he had agreed to. Her photographer packed her bag in silence. The rest of the evening was extraordinary. Dessert was served. The dancing began. 218 people had the wedding night. I had planned for 14 months. The invoice Petra sent the following morning was $4,060. It covered the 2 unregistered guests at the per-head catering rate, the venue's commercial photography fee, which applied to any professional photographer on the premises not pre-approved by the bride and groom, and a coordination surcharge for unscheduled event. Programming during the reception, every line item was supported by the contracts I had signed and paid. Renata's mother called me and said it was excessive. I read her the contract clause. She called back an hour later and told me Renata would pay it. Renata paid it 11 days later without further comment. People ask me if I feel bad about how that evening ended for her. I think about that question sometimes. And then I think about 14 months of planning and 220 guests and string, lights and white garden roses and a Tuesday evening in a kitchen with a man who waited 2 weeks for the right moment because he understood that some things belong to the people they belong to. And I think about a white dress and a hired photographer and a glass tapped with a knife without permission. No, I do not feel bad. If you have ever had someone walk into something you built and treat it as their own stage, and if you have ever been surrounded by people waiting to see whether you would shrink or stand, subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories here about people who stood, and every single one of them is worth staying for.